Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're unpacking Dr. Robert Peterson's fascinating look at the very nature of God, specifically exploring how the Creator actually shares some of his most profound traits with us. It's an incredible deep dive into theology, so let's just jump right in.
So first things first, what does it actually mean to share traits with the divine, right? I mean, how can we, flawed, everyday humans, possibly possess qualities that originate in an absolutely perfect God?
Well, to wrap our heads around this, we really need to look at a theological term called communicable attributes. Basically, these are qualities of God that have a derived creational semblance in his people. Put simply, these are the divine characteristics God uniquely hardwires into the lives of his followers, which actually allows us to reflect a tiny portion of his perfect nature.
Here's our roadmap for today's explainer. First, sharing the divine nature. Second, the standard of holiness. Third, righteousness, justice, and wrath. Fourth, the unfathomable love of God. And finally, number 5, reflecting God in us.
Let's kick things off with Section 1, sharing the divine nature, and what a derived semblance really looks like. Moving right along to Section 2, the standard of holiness, looking at how God is entirely unique and morally pure.
Dr. Peterson's text uses some incredibly powerful biblical metaphors to visualize exactly what this holiness looks like. We see God described as a lawgiver in Exodus, a consuming fire, a judge in Amos, and pure light in 1 John. So what's the takeaway here? Well, God's holiness is twofold. He is completely unique, like entirely distinct from us in his very being, and he is flawlessly morally perfect, without even a hint of sin.
And honestly, this brilliantly illustrates the immediate tension we face. Just look at the prophet Isaiah's vision in the temple. When Isaiah saw God's pure moral holiness, it instantly exposed his own impurity. His reaction? Absolute distress. He literally cried out that he was ruined because, against the backdrop of that kind of absolute purity, human sinfulness looks genuinely dreadful.
In that same vision, the angelic beings are crying out, "Holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts." Now, that threefold repetition, that isn't just some poetic flourish. It's an emphatic, glorious display of transcendent purity. It highlights this vast, almost unbridgeable gulf between a perfect creator and flawed humanity.
Which brings us to Section 3, righteousness, justice, and wrath, and God's moral order.
Now notice how the imagery takes a pretty sharp, aggressive turn here. To portray a God who has established a firm moral order, the text describes him as a warrior, a farmer expecting a harvest, a bear in a lion waiting in ambush, and once again, a consuming fire. This shows us that God actively governs the world. He's a just judge who cares deeply about moral order, and yes, that absolutely includes demanding justice for the poor and downtrodden.
Here's where Dr. Peterson makes a really crucial, almost paradoxical distinction. You've got inherent attributes like holiness and justice. God possesses these inherently. Even if sin literally never existed in the universe, God would still be perfectly holy and just. But then, on the flip side, you have a responsive attribute, which is wrath. God isn't inherently wrathful. His wrath is totally conditional. It's solely his righteous, settled response to cosmic treason and human rebellion.
So, the really important thing to grasp is that God's wrath isn't just some arbitrary, out-of-control anger. Not at all. It's an extension of his holiness and justice. It's a holy revulsion against all that is unholy. We first saw this displayed in the Garden of Eden, and it continues whenever humanity rebels against his perfect order.
All right, let's look at how this intense tension gets resolved in Section 4, the unfathomable love of God, love that is great and entirely undeserved. Just contrast the fierce bear and lion imagery we just looked at with these incredibly tender biblical images of God's love. The text portrays him as a bird sheltering its young, a caring shepherd, a faithful husband pursuing a perpetually unfaithful spouse, like we see in the amazing story of Hosea, and a loving parent. It just beautifully demonstrates a love that is vast, deeply committed, and let's face it, entirely undeserved by a rebellious world. Now, to understand the absolute climax of this theological dilemma, how a perfectly just God can actually forgive rebellious people, we have to define a pretty heavy term, propitiation. Basically, this is Christ's loving, atoning self-sacrifice that completely satisfies God's wrath against our sin, reconciling us back to him. This right here is the exact mechanism where God's strict demand for justice and his unfathomable love perfectly intersect. It's a real game changer.
And there is a massive theological safeguard we need to mention here. Propitiation does not pit a wrathful, angry father against a loving, passive son.
That is such a common misconception. Instead, it maintains perfect Trinitarian harmony. The cross supremely showcases God's love while simultaneously satisfying his wrath. It protects God's moral integrity. He couldn't just sweep sin under the rug, right? Justice absolutely had to be served, and love stepped in to provide the substitute.
The Apostle Paul puts it perfectly in Romans 5:8, proving that grace is truly God's proper work. Just look at the timing here. While we were still sinners, God didn't sit around waiting for humanity to clean itself up. In this astonishing display of grace, the Son voluntarily substituted himself to rescue people who were spiritually dead and actively rebelling against him. No way around it. That is incredible.
This all leads us to our final takeaway in Section 5, reflecting God in us and what it means to live new lives. Because these attributes are communicable, meaning they are literally designed to be shared and reflected by us. Both the Old and New Testaments mandate a totally distinct way of living. Be holy, because I am holy. God's people are called to actively consecrate themselves. We're meant to build real moral purity into our daily lives, leaving behind the desires of our former ignorance.
And Jesus takes this a step further in the Sermon on the Mount. He teaches that we aren't just supposed to practice external, surface-level rule following, like the Pharisees did just to look good in front of a crowd. Instead, we are called to cultivate a deep internal hunger and thirst for real righteousness. It has to start in the heart, and it definitely includes seeking practical justice for the people around us.
Finally, because this incredible Trinitarian love has literally been poured into our hearts, we are directly commanded to actively love one another. As John 13:34 makes clear, this isn't just a friendly suggestion, it's a new command. In fact, the source text points out that practicing this kind of sacrificial love is the absolute ultimate proof that we have truly been born of God and actually know Him.
So considering the massive, unfathomable price that was paid just to share these beautiful divine traits with you, we have to leave you with this ultimate question to ponder today. Knowing the absolute depth of His holiness, the sheer perfection of His justice, and the overwhelming sacrifice of His love, how are you going to actively reflect His holiness, righteousness, and love in your daily walk? Thanks so much for joining us for this explainer, and we'll catch you next time.